Welcome to Soul Soldier Speaks, where we honor the warrior within each of us on life's battlefield. I'm your host, Lindsay Taylor. Here we stand with those on the front lines of their own lives, those battling suicidal thoughts, addiction, grief, and life's hardest challenges. We honor the loved ones standing beside those struggling and remember those we've lost. Each episode, we delve into raw, unfiltered conversations and stories of people who faced the darkest of nights and emerged with healing, transformation, and hope. Together, we will navigate the battlefield, focusing on the battles that save and restore. This podcast is more than stories. It's a rallying cry, an army of soul soldiers reclaiming the light one story at a time. Together, we rise. Jason, gosh, we just spent some time talking right before I hit record on this, right? So welcome to the Soul Soldier Speaks podcast. I am just super, truly honored that you said yes to come on here and talk to us because I have been so inspired by your story. And we were just talking before I hit record on this, and I'm like, how did we even meet? How did we connect? And ultimately, we've never met in person, but I saw your story somewhere on social media, and I started following you. And like I told you, I'm a sucker for a good recovery story. Like, I was just super inspired by your story. And so I've just been following you for years now. I think it's been quite a while. So thank you. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm always happy to step up and support somebody else in their new ventures, and I just love networking and, you know, connecting with like-minded individuals. It's like, even though, you know, our stories may be different, we're all people, we're all the same, and we can really like lift each other up. I think that there's so much to be said about that, you know, instead of being like in competition, like I'm a podcaster, you're a podcaster. Get out of here. No, man. I want to, like, you know, amplify your voice. And
100%.
You know, hopefully you can help us, you know, amplify ours, you know.
Absolutely.
It's just helping each other out and being supportive of one another, you know what I mean?
Totally. It takes a village for sure. And we were just talking before we got on about the numbers of people that we lose each day to opioid-related overdoses. And then I was telling you that, you know, the number with suicides is very similar. So they're right. Both of them are right around 130 people a day. And so why would we not continue to come together, right? And try, we can't fight this battle alone. So yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, I would love to be on your podcast too. I just started following it yesterday. We'll talk about that more at the end so listeners can know where to check you out. But first and foremost, I like to start on this podcast before we dive into kind of your story, like with your struggle and some of the things that you went through. I always like to just start out with, who are you as a person, like at a soul level, like even before drugs, like, because that's not who we are, right? But like who we are at a soul level. So I just want to know, who is Jason? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Jason. I'm a person in long-term recovery and a new creation in Christ. I think, looking back in hindsight, these things make sense to me, but I think that I really was at odds with myself about this at the time growing up. But I grew up with a single mom household, so, you know, it was like we struggled, and my mom was very closed off emotionally, so I never really learned how to like express myself or feel comfortable in my feelings or exploring those too much. And I always found like really intense feelings very confusing, which is not a good mix when you're an empath, because I am totally an empath. So I can feel everything to the nth degree, but I didn't know how to make any sense of any of that because it was not taught to me, you know. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, she was from a different generation, but I was always very sensitive, very much a bleeding heart, wear my heart on my sleeve. I was never afraid to speak. Matter of fact, they call us no filter Rudeens for a reason in my family. So, you know, I can't sit in feelings without like letting them out, you know, and I've always been that way. And that used to not be, now it actually is like kind of a healthy thing because I've learned how to channel it better in healthier ways. But it used to be, just I was very like unpredictable and what do you call it? Reactive,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it could come out sideways a lot. And, I mean, if it was confusing to others, I'm sure it was because I was confused by it. I didn't even know what I was really feeling or how to express it. So yeah, I would say I always had a big heart. I was always at the core, like I had a lot of love to give, really cared a lot about things, in my life and my surroundings and the people in it. I think anybody that knew me in my, different stages of my addiction or hustling or criminal activity, like, because obviously I wasn't a criminal all the time,
Right.
It was like, but anybody that knew me at any point during those years would, I think, attest to that I was a pretty decent guy. I think when I sold drugs, I always had this false pride that I was like a drug dealer with a higher moral code, like I cared about my customers and stuff. And I'm not saying that I didn't, but at the same time, it's like looking back, I realize how ridiculous that sounds, and really, I don't want to know how many, like overdoses or God forbid, maybe even deaths that I played my role in,
Yeah.
I always liken it to like I used to work for the devil and now I switched sides, I'm so grateful I found Christ and he gave me a new plan and a purpose for my life because even when I found that, it was hard to realize or like accept that I was doing good and that I had changed and I was a good person. I remember asking my sponsor, like, when's the self-love going to come? And he just said to keep doing what I'm doing. And the best way to build self-esteem is through esteemable actions. So I just kept doing it. And I'm really proud and grateful to say that, over the years that self-love has came and it has developed. And I do realize that, I'm forgiven and there's no blemishes, I'm spot free,
Yes.
It's all because of Jesus. And so it's like crazy, man. Like everything led to this full circle. Now I get to help others, but for a long time, I was just lost in the deep and I was feeling a whole lot of intense feelings, which, ultimately just led to a lot of issues because of my sensitivity and my inability to understand my own feelings. As I said, is like, I tended to feel like a victim. I tended to feel righteous resentment a lot, suicidal tendencies, all that kind of stuff, because every feeling had to be to the max. Every feeling had to be all or nothing, black or white.
Yes. So. Gosh, I feel like, I've sat with so many people and just so much of what you just said there, I feel like people can relate, that have been in this struggle personally, even down to like like I thought I was like a responsible drug dealer, whatever the word that you use. But I've actually heard people say that before, like, because here's the deal. And this is why I ask you this question, like, just who are you aside from that? Because you just said, like, I have a big heart. Like, I always cared. I had a lot of empathy. I was sensitive. Like, those are all amazing qualities and traits. And just sounds like, from your upbringing and different things, you didn't know how to process some of those feelings sometimes or how to channel those feelings in a healthy direction, right? But like that being who you are, that's amazing, right? Like we need more empaths in this world, right? We need more people that are sensitive with big hearts, and so I think often, we see the person for the mistakes they made and we don't see the soul, like what's underneath it. The mistakes are not what defines us. We're all human. I think you said that in the beginning, like we relate on a human to human level and every single one of us are sinners. Every single one of us are broken in some way. Every single one of us struggle, but that's not who we are at our core. And so yeah, beneath all of that is a human with a big heart, right? Like that's what I see. And so that's amazing. And so now you have found how to bring that human with the big heart out in the healthy way, how to channel that in a healthy direction, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge too what you said about like the devil. I really do believe and I talked about this in my first podcast, this podcast isn't necessarily about religion. I know for different people, sometimes, that they might have different beliefs and I honor that and respect that. But, I always say, let's at least acknowledge that there is something far beyond our human comprehension to all our lives and stories, this love, this light force. So God, divine, Jesus, whatever name you want to give that. And then there's a force, an enemy at work in this world and an enemy of our souls. And so, devil, whatever you want to call that, but those that very much exists. Right. And so I love that your story is finding the light and the love that restores, which is Jesus in your world. That's the battle that saves and restores. But sometimes we get stuck in these battles of the enemy, of this not good enough, being in this lack, being in this darkness, like everything you described, which addiction is. It's all the enemy at work, So I want to highlight that too, because I think it's important. I want to get into, I actually went back to some of your social media posts, like way back. I mean, even from the start of your recovery, which I think back in 2016, right?
Yeah. Pretty much. That's probably exactly when I started really like recovering out loud, even though it was just at that time, it was like posts where I was just being really open and authentic about what I was going through. I found that helped me a lot in my journey. So I just kept doing it. And then people like yourself, would come out of the woodwork sometimes at events and be like, "Are you Jason Rudeen? Oh, I've been following you for years." And that's a weird feeling when you have some stranger approaching you and they like know your personal stuff, man. And I'm like, that took some getting used to, but yeah, it's been a blessing to find it. You just never know who's really like reading it or stopping to scroll,
Exactly. And it can literally save lives, literally, so I'm glad that you've been open about it on social media. So, your transformation, what I have seen, Jason, is that your transformation is nothing short of a miracle. Can you take us back? I want you to take us back to the moment when you hit rock bottom. What did that darkness feel like? And what was the turning point that made you fight for life? And I want to read a quote because I went back to one of your posts where you actually, I believe it was a poem you had written. So this is from one of your posts. It says, "Look into my eyes and tell me what you see. Complete brokenness. I literally had lost all hope. All I wished was that I could die. I'm no longer that man. 2 years ago today, I was on my knees with a huge knife to my throat, praying, 'Help me, help me.' I was asking for the strength to kill myself. Instead, what God gave me was the willingness to recover." So hearing those words, what do you feel now? And what was going through your mind that day? And how did you find the strength to surrender instead of giving up? So walk us through rock bottom in that day. And
oh my gosh. Yeah. You trying to make me cry already right off the top. That's weird hearing your own words like that. Oh, wow. I guess I felt a lot of emotion hearing you read that. Yeah, so I don't know. It was funny. I chuckled when you said, tell us about rock bottom because I was thinking, which one,
Oh, yeah, true.
So many things in life that should have resulted in me like pulling my head out of my ass. But so that is crazy though, that you picked that quote in conjunction with the question, because it's really about the same thing that you're asking. And what first came to mind was, the one pivotal moment that actually led to me beginning to change for real, where it became an actual change that I was putting effort into and, eventually found the ability to sustain it. But it was like the last hurrah, if you will, because I had been going through it for some time at that point, after my arrest in 2014, I was facing 98 months in prison. I had gotten busted. They had some detectives at the scene at my work when I got off work, and I had set up a pick up from my guy who, I mean, I always tell people, like, I sold for the cartel. Well, yeah, I did. But I just, it was just this dude that I worked with, and, he had family ties to that stuff. Because there was times he'd show up in my house with, like, he'd be like, man, I've seen like 5 cops in the last half hour. Are you home? And he's like, can I just drop something there for a little bit? And he'd bring like a basketball size rock of, stuff over and shove it. It barely fit my safe. And then he'd break me off like a huge chunk after he'd come pick it back up. And, like, here's $1,500 worth, just like nothing, like it ain't nothing, and I'd be like, so he was definitely connected, and, through his blood. And there was things that he, over the time we worked together where he'd like be checking out his phone and he'd be like, oh, but his response was similar to what mine would have been. But he'd be like, man, you want to see this? Like somebody was messing with my cousin's money and they found where they were, and you want to see what they did? And I'd be like, no, dude, I'm good. Because they're pretty vicious if you mess with their money. So,
oh yeah.
Anyway, when I was looking at the prison time after the bust, I say all that to say, just for backstory, because it was I guess highlight how serious the situation was to me in the moment.
Right.
Because I knew that I couldn't sell no more. I've never had been facing charges like that ever in my life, anything other than like small time, like little possession charges and like petty crimes and stuff is all I ever got busted for, driving offenses, things of that nature. This was like a big time deal. And because I spent so many years in the hustle, I knew a lot of people that dealt with situations like this. I knew that they would be under surveillance. I knew that they would get, tapped or, whatever, they were under surveillance. So if they got busted still messing around because they didn't heed the warning that was in front of them, they would end up getting in more trouble and their charges would get trumped up and they'd be going for the full haul with no breaks. So I was like really worried about losing my son and losing my freedom for that long of a time. It's almost a decade. So I was like, I wouldn't sell. Mind you, at the same time, my guy is calling me. He's actually really cool. And I think it's because I always came correct with his money. He was like, he would try to talk me into it. He'd be like, I'll give you 4 ounces and you can make up the money that you lost in the bust in one shot. Like we'll get you back on your feet and rolling again. Cause I was broke, pretty much penniless. And I was, the dope had run dry through all the time I was selling. I was trading stuff and, so I had acquired a lot of like cool stuff. So now I'm like sitting in my house, depressed, scared shitless, and I'm trying to, pedal off trades and just keep feeding the monkey on my back. Basically, I remember I was down to like my TV and my laptop, and that was all I had left. And I was like, and I wiped my laptop clean. So this was the last trade. Sold my Lenovo laptop for like a teener of glass. And then I ended up doing it all in like within like 15 minutes of itself. I don't know why. I must have been in a really dark place. It's kind of hard, kind of a blur, but I just remember like I pre-made these syringes and I made them so full and so thick, and I was going to stash them and do one and then stash the other one or whatever. And what I ended up doing was like, I went into this psychosis and then I got mad at one point because I was thinking about my ex and this guy and that she was like messing around with. And then I did the other one right after, like 10 minutes after. And I went into like the craziest. I mean, I had a lot of psychosis and stuff in my days off of drugs, but this one was a tailor-made version of hell just for me. It fed off every fear and insecurity and thought, dark or otherwise, twisted, fantasies. It was really weird. It was a ride. It was like 16 hours probably of nonstop, and then it kept shifting into different modes or different, like a new level of hell. So at the end of it, like it ended up where and mind you, none of these people were not there. These conversations were not real.
Right.
But they were real to me. So at the end of it, but this is my perspective. At the end of it, it was my ex-wife, my youngest son's mother. Her fiance had my son there, and they wanted me to come outside. And I was down in my garage. My mother's garage, actually, let's be real. I didn't own the place. I was living at my mom's house at, 36 years old. Opened the garage. They wanted me to open it. They wanted me to step outside. They'd let me see him. I'd go out into the driveway, and I was afraid to peek around the corner. And, it's broad daylight, middle of the afternoon.
Wow.
Suburban neighborhood in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. and I'm like, they're not there. But I'm like hearing it, they're like telling me these commands, and I'm just like doing them. And in hopes that they'll let me see my son, and they would not come out. And I was getting so pissed. And then I was walking around my house. I had every window open because I needed to be able to hear outside. It was super quiet in the house, and I was just geeking every window all around. They wouldn't come out, and I was like arguing. I was like yelling at these voices that, yelling at them. And then I would cry and I would plead and I would apologize. And I was just going through this complete roller coaster of emotion throughout this psychosis. I would be like bargaining. I would be apologizing. I would feel like self-loathing. I would get angry at them and then entitlement, like feeling like they, I'm his dad. Boy needs his father. It was like so intense. And then so it ended up breaking me down to the point where I was on my knees, fresh out the shower. Because you get the stuff, it's coming out of your pores when you're high like that. And sometimes you'll shower like a few times in a day just because you feel like so weird. Your skin feels weird. So I like just got out of the shower, and then I had this big Rambo knife, and I was like buck naked on my mom's living room floor on my knees, holding this knife to my throat with all the windows still open, and I'm wailing like a freaking probably sounded like a dying coyote or something. Like I was making noises were coming out of my body that I didn't even know I was capable of making. And that poem said, that poem said I was asking for help, right? And I remember holding it to my throat, and I was going to let myself just fall forward and slam the knife through or whatever. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I was so in my wailing and flailing, whatever, I started saying, help me, help. And I was just asking for the strength to kill myself, like the poem says. But what had happened was I ended up putting down the knife and picking up the cordless phone and calling this guy, Jason, I knew from Narcotics Anonymous. And that guy was a previous like sponsor of mine that never really had time to do work. And I wasn't really showing up consistently. So he like never answered his phone, but he did this time.
Wow.
And
Wow.
he told me some simple things to do, and then to call him every day. And if he didn't answer, to leave him a voicemail and tell him 3 things I'm grateful for, 1 thing I'm doing for my recovery today. And he told me to start praying once a day, even because I didn't know God, you know.
Yep.
But he was like, he's like, just whatever. He's like, just say something, just as if something bigger than you is listening, because he's like, that's all it takes is a willingness, you know, like, you know, you take actions that you don't understand and you get results that you can't deny. And it really worked. He answered the phone a few weeks later, and then we actually started to do the work that, you know, like the recovery program has you do. But it was crazy, man. I just, in that moment of just wanting the strength to end it, I got the strength to do something different, something I never expected, something even looking back. I don't know where the hell that thought came from to make that call, why I put the knife down, other than the fact that I just was so pissed at myself that I couldn't do it, you know? And
God, divine intervention.
It was crazy, yeah. And I said, so that's that quote that you picked.
Yeah.
Was, really on point for that question, actually. Good job.
You know, I'm excited to get into obviously your journey from there, because I think, gosh, people have to know that they can be exactly what you just described. I mean, in just the depths of hell, at the deepest, darkest rock bottom. Like you said, you had many, right? But they need to know that there's hope and that recovery and healing is possible. And that's the whole point of this, right? One thing I want to back up to for just a moment too is I saw this video. Chris Herron did it. Like, he goes around and speaks. He was an old, I think, NBA player, and he speaks to students about, it's like a substance use prevention. And so I forget what the video is called. I'm blanking on the name right now. But anyway, he talked about how, you know, he got into heroin and he had that struggle. But he talks about how we always talk about the worst part of addiction, right? Like, when you see addiction, you see, like, in that post that I got that from, you had like your, I don't know if it was a mug shot or just, you know, a picture of you in your addiction, and then a picture of you clean, right? And you can always see the stark difference, right? And so he said a lot of times when we talk about addiction, we talk about that, just that work when somebody's on their knees in that rock bottom state and what they looked like, you know, before and after. He's like, but we don't talk about, I think the film's called The First Day. There you go. Because he said, we don't talk about the first day. And so, meaning, like, where did it all begin? Everybody has a first day. And he tells these kids, like, you think it's innocent. You think you're just in the basement with your friends, drinking, having fun. You don't realize that the first day is actually the most crucial decision you can make, because that's what ultimately then can lead to what you were just describing. And not for everybody, but he really makes the point that it's so important that we actually focus on the first day, not like always where people end up. You know, so for you, just briefly, kind of, where did this begin for you? Because it didn't start there. I mean, it wasn't that intense, right?
No.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, when I was growing up, you know, I went to my dad's every other weekend, and he had a house in Crystal, and he had a bar in the basement. Usually when I'd be over there, it was like, you know, my uncle and my aunt, you know, and some other like friends of his would come over, and, you know, they'd have, you know, little parties. We had like the whole bar set up in the basement, and, you know, dartboard, and we had like, you know, a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and
good time.
I was just a kid. Yeah, and I was just little, and he would give me he had these little mugs, and he would like put a little tiny bit of beer in it. And then I remember when the adults really got wasted, you know, they leave a cigarette burning, or even, I think, sometimes a joint, and I'd like sneak a puff, and then I'd have to go run in the other room for like a few minutes because I'd be hacking up a lung, you know, and I'd be like seeing stars and trying to get like the tears out of my eyes and stuff so I could go back in front of people, because I was scared I was going to get busted. So there was that, and then at home too, my mom, same thing, big social drinker. So it was very like normal and around me and just what everybody did. And I was intrigued. I always wanted to, I guess, be a grown up or whatever. And yeah, try that stuff. So I was curious early on, and I guess, it looked fun to me. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's usually where it begins, right? Innocent fun, if you will.
Right.
We talked before I hit record about that kind of teenage experimentation phase that, not saying it's a good thing or the right thing, but it's a very common thing that teens will experiment with substances, alcohol, and unfortunately you just never know where that can lead. Right. Some people are able to handle that socially and others not. And so, but everybody starts at that level, ultimately, that innocent, if you will, level.
Right. And then, I mean, after like when my mom got in a motorcycle accident and I got sexually abused by my cousin Alan, who was like 10 years older than me, I had put that in a box in my brain. I was only 5. But when I was 13 and I started having those dreams and that recall happened with that trauma, that was around the same time that I actually started like really smoking weed regularly or drinking beer more often, like army crawling in my mom's room and stealing beers and stealing cigarettes and using more often and obsessing about how I'm going to be able to use and stuff at that age, coupled with that very confusing, like total recall of unresolved trauma so I found the therapeutic value of it early on, like the self-medicating aspect, because as I experienced that trauma and I began to unpack it moving forward, or trying to, I should say, I ran away every turn. Like I went to therapy and when it got intense, I ran away, when people would try to talk to me about it, I ran away from the conversations. I was always a runner when I was young like that because I didn't know how to make sense of big feelings, like I said. So I was out and it was crazy, man. I just, the only thing that helped, because it was like all of that stuff just gave me like so much confusion and internal struggle. And it made it hard to have intimate relationships. It made it impossible to feel safe or secure or whatever. So I would just try to like numb it out. It was the only way that I could like tap into like the sexual part of my personality or the vulnerable enough to be able to speak about something that was hard or express myself in a way that wasn't just anger or shutting down, And,
yes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think you bring up a really, really important thing with that a lot of times when drugs do become an issue for people, it is a form of escape. It is a form of numbing. And so a lot of times there is trauma and other mental health struggles beneath the surface, right, that lead people to become dependent on those things. So I think you bring up a really important point that trauma is absolutely a risk factor, if you will, to becoming dependent and struggling with drugs, because it's a form of numbing out and escaping what's extremely hard to confront. Yeah.
Well, it's like I always tell people, and in a lot of ways, drugs saved my life when I was young. I was I was full of angst and I felt I was very depressed and I had suicidal thoughts at that young of an age, 13 was my first suicide attempt. So I was like, yeah, I mean, it really like drugs saved my life at one time. That was my solution.
For sure.
It made life tolerable and worth living and hell, even actually sometimes enjoyable,
Yeah. You know what?
Back then.
Man, you saying that. So I shared with you too that my current work, I work at a suicide treatment center. And so that's all we treat is just individuals struggling with thoughts of suicide. And we do this thing, we follow a model called CAMS. It stands for Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicidality. It's a mouthful. But in that model, we do a stabilization plan every single time because that's really, to keep the person safe between sessions. That's the goal of it. And, sometimes you have clients write down as a factor of something that's going to keep them from like the suicide crisis. Sometimes it's unhealthy coping skills that they're writing down. And obviously the goal in our therapy is to get them to a point where they're able to identify healthier ways of coping with those things. But we will not. So I had a client who struggled significantly with substance use. And one of his coping mechanisms was marijuana. At times it saved his life. And so you bringing that up, I was like, okay, that's fine. We can put it on there because if it's keeping you alive, then that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And over time, we're hoping to get you to a point where we can do something else, right? But like if that's what's keeping you alive right now. So again, man, such an important thing that you point out that.
So yeah, I mean, think about it. It's like it's a form. You're assessing this person for where they're at. I mean, even like the responses don't even need to make sense to you because unfortunately, it may not be rooted in reality, but a person's perception is their reality.
Yes.
And if that's what's getting you through in that moment, then that's where you're at today. And, it's not to say that we can't get you somewhere else where you have a healthier coping skill.
Yep.
But I think a big part of that is, to your point, like meeting them where they're at, accepting them for who they are and the situation that they're in right now.
Right.
And, there's a reason there's so many tools that we can learn. And it's our responsibility to be open and willing to show up and like take the time to learn them. And then, of course, it's ultimately up to us to pick up those tools and use them when needed.
Absolutely.
But I didn't have any of that shit when I, before.
Yeah.
And now I have like a really decent toolbox at my feet that I can, pick up and use a lot of different tools to help me through situations in my life where I can get through them without reverting back to self-medicating and unhealthy stuff.
Well, going back to one thing you said too is now you I think you said this when you were talking about your rock bottom moment, there was a willingness to do something different or try something different. I can't remember when you said that, but you talked about being willing. And I think, back then what you were describing, like you would just run away when it would get intense in the therapy or like you weren't quite there. You weren't quite ready or able at that time. Right. And now in your life, like you could have had that toolbox back then. Right. But it wasn't something that maybe you were able or willing to do at the time. So there also does take a willingness to do life a different way, to learn these tools, to learn these skills. Right.
Yeah. If you do 12-step recovery, there's a saying that, there's only 3 ingredients that you have to be successful at recovery. And it's called the how of recovery. And that's honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness.
Yep. All those 3 things are huge. Yes. Okay. So going back, I read that you spent nearly 30 years battling addiction. And then you mentioned even working with the cartel. So you already kind of touched on what your mindset was back then. Did you ever believe when you were going through that there was a way out? Or did you feel trapped in that life?
I mean, no, I didn't ever think there was a way out. And honestly, I mean, if I'm being real, I probably didn't really want like out. I just wanted to obviously my story in my life was always like give up one crutch for another. So when something would get out of hand, let's say like when I had that meth-induced psychosis, which was like, again, between all the different drugs, I used to sell acid and I had similar experiences with that. Cocaine had similar experiences with that, ecstasy, tranquilizers, all these different things, weed, drinking, always would lead me to some point like that where it was just so bad. And I was like, I am done. That would be my story. I'd be like, I'm done with that. but now I'll just do this thing over here. And I'm going to chill on that because that's getting like really dark and weird and out of control. So I don't think I ever really wanted to like out. I just didn't like feeling that out of control when it would finally get to that, peak of, that experience that I had mentioned earlier. It was, it was a significant event because it was like a singular event where I can't explain it, but the willingness piece cracked wide open in that moment for me, which was strange. I mean, it was weird too, because after I talked to that guy on the phone for a while, and then he gave me some directions. I told you about the phone call thing, and then the things he wanted me to say and like to pray every day. But he also wanted me to call my boss and get honest about what I had been up to and tell him I wasn't going to work, because this was at like 7 a.m. when I got him on the phone, and I was supposed to be to work at 8 o'clock.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I was tripping bad. So he's like, you got to call him, and you got to, and tell him you're not coming in, but not only that, you got to tell him what you've been up to, because your secrets are keeping you sick, was exactly what he said. And then he told me that I needed to call and set up therapy, because I had been talking about that for a year. I had been to like 4 treatments in that year previous to that experience, that psychosis. So this had been like, I was in and out of the rooms. I was barely paying attention when I was there. I did not take time to get to know anybody, and I sure wasn't letting them get to know me, but I did meet that guy and ended up, whatever. I just got his number so that I could show my mom, like, see, I have a sponsor in the phone and say Jason sponsored on it. And I'm like, I wasn't working with this dude. You know what I mean? I just, I got his number to use it to get people off my back. And
yeah, I think so many people.
It was just weird.
Yeah, I think so many people can relate to that. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I don't know what the stats are, but the amount of like relapses, right? Like the times that people go into treatment and continue to go back, it's high. So many people can relate to that too. So one of your posts said, my worst day sober is better than my best day using the needle. So can you describe that what that contrast feels like? So you just said, like, when you were in it, no way. And did you even want to, right? But now that you're sober, now that you're on the other side, you see that my worst day sober is better than my best day using. So yeah, how does life compare now to that, and just that stark contrast in feelings and beliefs?
Well, I feel like, the crux of that statement is basically that even when I'm in it, when I'm going through it, when life is getting lifey and I'm struggling with my kids or on a professional or with my pain, because I have some chronic pain issues, it's like I get to have these problems today. And even in the struggle, there's so much to be grateful for, because I would either be dead in prison or I would be facing an entirely different set of challenges right now if I was still slamming a needle in my arm. So it's more about keeping where I come from up front and center all the time. I can't forget what I came from. That keeps me from going back. And that's a big reason why newcomers and being in service to people that are trying to find their legs in recovery and stuff is so important, because it's reminders of where I've been, and
yes.
So that's what that statement to me really stands for at its core, is that, I'm not, life might not be where I want it, or where I envision it, or how it's, whatever.
Right.
Today. But I'm in a hell of a lot better spot than I would be if I still was slamming that needle in there.
For sure. For sure. So, so many people battling addiction struggle with shame. What were some of the biggest lies that your addiction told you? And how did you start rewriting that story?
I guess the biggest lies would be like, for instance, I used to really, I kind of briefly mentioned that I had a lot of sexual abuse that I survived early in my life, and it caused so many issues for me. And I used to feel so defective, like, especially in regards to my romantic relationships, I used to feel really defective, and I hated myself for that, and I wished that I could control that, or like, what's wrong with me? But I think it was just this really deep-seated insecurity and fear that kind of would take over, because like I said, I always wear my heart on my sleeve, and that's part of that. It's like when you true intimacy is at a heart and soul level, and then you can experience beautiful, experiences with each other in the physical aspect or whatever. But it's because of that deep connection, and I was unable to, go there. And so I felt defective, and I told myself that I was defective and that I was a freak, and I always said a lot of negative self-talk. So those were some of the biggest lies. Another one would be that I was like like a decent drug dealer or whatever. And then another one would be like that I was a good dad. I remember promising my newborn, when his mom pulled the truck up right to the back door of the bar, had these guys that came in and said, Mandy's outside or whatever. And she made me promise my son, who was like not even 6 months old, sitting in the back seat, that I was going to be coming home in a little bit. And of course she was being crabby. And I remember I promised him. And then when she peeled out, I was like, who does she think she is? And I had all this righteous indignation because she was, and whatever my reasons, that I was feeling resentful towards her because she was always nitpicking me, ultimately, like, that's, no, nothing is always just a one-way street. But this is where I ended up. I was just always resentful, but keeping it inside. And then I was starting to act out in these ways. And yeah, I ended up like getting super wasted, and I purposely like went to somebody's after party when the bar closed and disappeared and shut my phone, didn't come home that night at all, because I'll show her, because, we were newlyweds and we had a newborn, and I took for granted, like, she wouldn't find a replacement or something, which
a lie, another lie that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, is crazy. Like, I don't know, like, a better question would almost be like, when were you truly honest with yourself? Like, it's hard to even think. There's so many stupid things that I had myself believe in, or talked myself into, or, I made sense out of a whole lot of nonsense. In my active use. So
yeah,
it's a good question, though.
No, I think so many people can relate to that, though, right? Like, I made a whole lot of nonsense. Yeah, that's so. You describe yourself as a new creation in Christ. So, moving into your recovery, what was your first real encounter with like God's grace, and how has faith played a role in your recovery?
There was a couple that stand out, but that I wasn't aware of until later. First being that help me wailing like a dying animal moment. Because I think that was probably my first real prayer. And I didn't even know I was praying, I didn't even know I was pleading to God for anything. I didn't even know if God was real. And then if he was real, because I was a big victim, I would probably been cursing his name, you know. But yeah, so that was one. And then another psychosis that I was in, I went to a Teen Challenge, which is a long-term program, faith-based one. I went in there for the men's short term. That's where you have to start in that, you know, because I didn't believe in God, but they have like a secular and a faith-based track on just the first initial short term. So I was in there, but I showed up. I did a bunch of dope that day on my way there. So I was in the psychosis in the room, and I couldn't leave my room for like 2.5 days because I was flying so hard. And I thought my veins were going to explode, and I was having this like completely dark, like the devil. I'm telling you, like looking back, like the devil had his grips on me so hard in that place and made me want to run away from that place and medicate, you know, go to what I know. But this man, which full circle, this is such a cool story. So this guy, I'm like freaking out in this room, right? And I'm like making all these noises. So this guy who was a tech there, he heard me through the door because I was making a bunch of crazy noises again in there, kind of like similar to that one day in my mom's living room. And anyway, he came in the room and I was trying to like speak to him and explain to him what was going on. And from what he could make out, I just know that the dude looked completely freaked out. And he was like, I'm going to get somebody that can help. I'm going to be right back. And then like a few minutes later, this guy, he introduced him and let him in. His name is Dave Johnson. If you're in or around Minnesota, you guys, he's got a ministry called Lost Sheep Ministries, setting the captives free. This dude will drive 700 miles and come pick you up and bring you to a treatment center. He's got such a heart for the Lord and for the lost. You know, he's the one that he will,
I love that.
You know, leave the 99. He will go distances for that. And it's crazy because he doesn't ask for anything in return. But at the time, I had no idea who this man was. I just knew he looked like Santa. He came in my room. I'm like thinking that my veins are going to explode. I'm going to die. And this dude gives me a picture. I'm sure you've probably seen it. If you haven't, you got to look it up. But it's like a picture of like addiction art. It's like of a biker on his knees and he's going to stick a needle in his arm. And his arm is also Jesus's arm. So like, it's like Jesus is behind this biker and he's looking all scared and in pain too. But their arm like comes into the same arm and the dude's holding a needle to it.
Wow.
And then on the ground, there's like a skull and like a candle and a ashtray and, you know, works and a beer and cigarettes or whatever, a gun. But it's a really powerful image. He gives me like a printout of that picture. And then he asked me if he could pray for me and anoint me with oil. And I had no idea about any of that. So I said, sure. But dude, he anointed me with oil. He said a prayer and then he left and it took my psychosis away. Like, completely. Wow. I was able to finally fall asleep, and it was like, at the time I wasn't aware of that. Same thing with like that day at my mom's, right? Like when I got real and I made those phone calls he told me to make, just the simple act of like, you know, confessing from my mouth to another human being and then to God by yelling, help me, that's, you know, turning to God, right? Even if I wasn't aware of it, like those simple actions, I completely was out of my psychosis. I ended up cleaning my mom's whole house and I was in the best mood the rest of the day, but I was like firm resolve. I wasn't going to get high anymore after that. For some reason, it was weird. But yeah, it was a complete transformation because of God's power that I wasn't aware of at the time, that was all God. You know, it's weird, like, when I got baptized and then to see how that walk would ultimately bring my mom into the church, you know. And then I ended up getting to baptize her later. And, you know, I led the baptism team and stuff at the church and got to help so many people take that step, profession of faith. And like those moments where you like sit down and you like humbly ask him to like work in your heart and in your life and change you. You know, all I can say, you guys listening, is like, be careful what you wish for, man. Because once you invite him in, now his work's begun, and his work's not going to end. He's going to keep chiseling away at you, and that's going to be forever till we, you know, find the grave. But his work will never be done because we're always going to be broken, you know, and fallible. But yeah, it was like those moments were so pivotal. When I did my 5th step was another one. I was an outpatient, extended care, treatment. So it was like after the initial 30 days. And then there was like an extended care program I stayed at for another 4 months. You move into an apartment building and like stay in an apartment with 4 other guys or whatever. So I was there for a long time. And that's where I actually ended up coming to Christ, was when I was in that extended care. But yeah, all these things, like there was those few moments where it was just like looking back, those were like the pivotal moments where God, like when I realized how bad I felt on Sundays and I wanted to go to church with these guys randomly. I was like, can I go with you guys next week? Because Sundays suck here. And I'm like, and they have coffee and donuts there, and you dudes are cool because we talk all the time in NA, and like these are cool dudes. So I'm like, can I go with you guys next Sunday? They're like, yeah. I'm like, because I got to get the hell out of this building, man. Like everybody's out on visits on Sunday, and nobody comes and sees me, and I get in a dark headspace. And they were like, yeah, man. And I didn't go there expecting to hear a sermon that was completely tailored to me, to my deepest shame and my failures as a father, talking about my oldest 2 children that I had been estranged from. I didn't bring them up in this interview, but, you know, I got a 25 and a 23-year-old that I haven't been in their life since they were 1 and 3 because of the choices I made. And that was a big source of my suicidal tendencies and stuff through the years, and a big motivator in my self-destructive choices and the lifestyle I was living and the excessive ways that I would use. But I was like, I just wanted coffee and donuts and to get the hell out of that apartment, hang out with these cool guys from NA. I always say I did not expect to get nut punched by God that day. But he did. He grabbed a hold, and that was the first time that they did an altar call, and I said a prayer with the pastor about, you know, asking Jesus to come into my heart and, you know, be the Lord and leader of my life.
Yeah.
And I recited this prayer, and ever since, like, I've just never lost that conscious contact with God. I felt him come into me that day, and I hyperventilated for an hour after the service. I couldn't stop crying. I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. My buddy Jim put his hand on my shoulder and said, that's the Holy Spirit. And I was like, I don't know why, but I believe you, right?
Yeah, because it's a feeling inside that you can't even, it's hard to describe.
Undeniable. The presence. I get goosebumps talking about it. You know, it's like the presence is something that you can't deny when you feel it. You know, I love the wording where they say like the Holy Spirit will reveal itself to you, right? It's like I tried to read the Bible 100 times, and it might as well have been written in Spanish. And then all of a sudden, after I had this Holy Spirit moment where he touched me on a soul level and I felt it, the Bible not only makes sense, but it's like I thirst for it, and it like touches me, and I apply it, and I could have never made heads nor tails of what it was talking about in a lot of those scriptures before. It just made no sense to me, you know?
Well, they say
it will reveal itself.
Totally.
to you.
And it sounds like you had a moment where you felt it. And so then that was it. You were able to get into relationship with God. Bible is more just like head knowledge. But if you don't have that heart knowledge, that true relationship, that feeling that, you haven't felt God in your soul, like you were just describing. Yeah. Then it's hard to make sense of it and understand it. So,
I mean, I immediately jumped into a small group, Bible study, and it was weird too. Like they were all like in their late 50s and 60s. And I was like this complete hot mess, kind of like gangster, dope fiend, like type guy, potty mouth, and like complete opposite of these people. I felt like a fish out of water showing up at their house the first couple times, but the experience of being in that Bible study group for 6 years after the fact, it's been invaluable to my development and my life, and they're just like me.
Yep. 100%.
All the same stuff, like different, but same, you were talking about that earlier in the show where it was like, or no, before
we hit record. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that you don't know why, but you feel like so connected and like you relate so strongly to people in addiction, even though, right, or homeless or suicidal. And I was like, listening to you, and I was going to tell you that it's because we are even people in recovery. This isn't really about like, let's put down the drugs and alcohol, right? It's not. It's so much deeper than that. It's like we have to unlearn so much and then learn a new way to live and be. And we have to face down our hurts, habits, and hangups, and like and that's why I call myself a new creation in Christ, because the old me is dead. You think about a baptism, right? A water baptism. It's like when I went under that water, the old me, that symbolizes the old me is dead.
Yes.
And then when he pulled me out of that water, that's me dripping in obedience, and I'm newly minted in Christ. And that was such an awesome way for me to look at it. It was like symbolic of like the old me is dead, and this is me rising up new, out of the water, right? And it's been that way, and now I'm just like a work in progress.
Yeah. And I love what we were talking about before that you mentioned is just human to human, you can relate to people. It doesn't matter what struggles we've been through, what hurts, habits, or hangups we have. Even if I've never personally experienced an addiction, I've got hurts, I have habits, I have hangups. And
we insecurities and fears and relationship and communication issues and, gosh, you name it, we're all just figuring it out as we go along. Right?
Exactly.
And that's what I learned on this faith journey.
Yeah,
sure.
100%. And that just feeling, that thing that you described of the Holy Spirit coming into you, you got a dose that day of unconditional love, light, and grace, all things that are opposite of what the enemy was doing when you were in that addiction of just darkness and lies and illusions and just all these things, right? And so that's why God saves. That's why God saves and restores. So thank you for sharing that part of your journey, because I think it's so important to people. So if, your story, like it's just one of truly radical transformation, like hearing where you were, and then this journey of recovery, what would you say has been the most important thing on your journey of recovery? And like, if someone listening right now is in the thick of addiction and feeling hopeless, what do you want them to hear in this moment?
I would say, well, first off, there's hope. And secondly, don't do it alone. But you want to find people that have what you want and embody that, because you can go to support groups or church or wherever you want to go, and you can hear people that speak a good game. They tell a good story, they wax poetic, as my co-host Charles always says, wax poetic around the table. But you want to find somebody whose walk matches their talk. You want to find somebody who's the way that they live embodies those elements that you would desire for yourself and your own life, or for your family, that you wish you could prevent to your family, your job, the people in your life, and putting your best foot forward in life. So, because what you surround yourself with is what you will become. And so it takes a village. I always say I treat my head like a bad neighborhood. I don't go there alone. So if I'm in a dark place, even today, I need to reach out. I need to find support, whether that's just somebody to listen, or I can go to a group anytime, whether it's faith-based or non, and listen to other people share their experiences. And I don't have to say a word, and I can get so much out of that. So yeah, just seek support. Don't do it alone. There is hope. You can overcome it. Because if I can do it, I know you can do it. Period.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard that. I treat my head like a bad neighborhood. I don't go there alone. That is huge. Huge.
Totally.
We always say, like, you're never alone. Don't do it alone. But like, that just really gave me this image of, like, so true. Like, we face these things in life and in our heads that, like, we can't do alone. Truly. We need to be in community. We need that support. It's huge.
And the reason that I think it's so important to highlight that for people is because what's our tendency? Our tendency is to be the island. Our tendency is to be self-sufficient. Our tendency is to try to fix, manage, or control things ourselves. And I don't care if you're an addict or you're not. That's everybody. We all are taught, or were at least, that we can't count on others, that we need to be strong and be independent and figure it out. And you know what? That's really sad, because life is so much easier and burdens are so much lighter when you have others helping you carry the load, or offering you support, or, you can ask some wise people, again, that walk matches their talk, for advice. And not only ask them for the advice and listen to it, but you know what? You can actually go and, like, follow their suggestion. You can try to apply what they, and when you apply that advice, you will get, the results that you can't deny. You'll try. I always say it, it's like I took actions I didn't believe in, and I got results that I couldn't deny. Wow. And that's how I learned what really works in life compared to what didn't. What coping skills or behaviors did I have that were maladjusted and not effective for living a healthy life? I wouldn't have been able to tell you before. I was only able to really identify those things once I allowed others to support me and listen to the support and apply it,
so true.
And try to follow other people's suggestions.
So
and
true.
they share that burden with you, man.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that's not even bringing Christ into the picture.
Right.
If you're a believer and he gives you the strength for another day, he'll give you the peace to not lose your cool, and he'll give you all that stuff so that you can face it, but he can't take away the consequences, right? So you still have to, God won't do for us what we can't do or what we can do for ourselves. So yeah, I'll say that again. Yeah. God won't do for us what we can do for ourselves. So that being said, we need to do our part, in stepping through and healing relationships or the parts within ourselves on the journey, but he'll give us the strength to face it and the peace.
Yes.
To do it with some style, maybe.
Amen. Amen. Yes. What, as we wrap this up, what would you say is the biggest, most important thing that you've gained in recovery? And I did want to acknowledge, fatherhood, I think, is something at least that I've seen from your social media that's important to you. It does seem you have a relationship with your younger son that you were describing, when he was a baby. I saw a Father's Day post that you had put a couple years into your sobriety, and you said, "Happy Father's Day, gentlemen. I'm so blessed and grateful for a second chance to be a present father in my son's life. I love you, Wyatt, forever with all my heart. I'll never take you for granted again." So I wanted to acknowledge that's probably something you've gained. But yeah, what have you gained in your recovery?
So much, first and foremost, just that relationship with myself and with God. Like I said, I struggled with that. I was doing all the right things for the first few years of my recovery, and I still felt so much negative feelings towards myself, and I remember it was like I just had to dig my heels in after I asked my sponsor, and he said to keep doing what you're doing. Best way to build self-esteem is through esteemable actions. I was like, because I was getting impatient, and I didn't like that I would still have those feelings crop up. But, there's a lot of shame that you carry when you fail your children and, 2 failed marriages and career paths that I had been on that I loved the people so much, and I really could see myself doing those things for a long time and then letting them down. And, just the endless line of people that I let down or disappointed or hurt over the years that I couldn't live with those things. And it took a long, long time to forgive myself for a lot of that. So there's that ability to find that relationship with myself, and then find a relationship with God was paramount. And, everything else stems from that,
Yeah.
The quality of my relationship with my son, my youngest son, Wyatt, is a byproduct of that, and I can't lose sight of that. If I put one thing ahead of something else, it's like I got to remember that if my relationship to God and my recovery are first in my life, then everything will be good. And if they become back burner items, then everything else is going to suffer. But other than that, just some of the great opportunities I've had in my advocacy and stuff, being a part of the Way Out podcast has been huge for me, and it continues to be such a blessing, one of the biggest blessings of my recovery, to be a part of the show. And then, just being able to step into opportunities that arise, like this recovery cafe that we're starting up is another one that it's going to be so big, man, and it's going to help so many people. And it's crazy to me that, through my journey and the connections I made, a good friend of mine, Bill, who's one of the founders, had told me flat out, he's like, "I just want you at the table for this, man." Like to feel respected and loved and valued in a community, to feel like you have something of value to add to the stream of life. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's
100%.
there's so much.
Yes,
There's so much.
I know. I talk about, so I just wrote a book. I'm in the editing phases of it. And I talk about
awesome.
I talk about at the core, as humans, we need to feel belonging and significance. And so what you're describing right there is belonging is like that connection and that love. And so that comes from self-love, God, all those things of feeling like you belong in the world, you have a place, and then significance, like you're giving back. You found meaning and purpose in your life. And as humans, we need those two things in order to be healthy and thriving, So that's huge. That's huge.
Well, there was a moment years ago when a friend of mine, Chris, who I really looked up to, he ran the drug court program in Hennepin County when it first was in its infancy. He was the first paid peer recovery specialist that worked for Hennepin County. And, you know, he told me that I should do Recovery Coach Academy. And I was like, you know, I was at that early stages where I didn't think I had anything to offer. Like, who's going to listen to me, or what do I like? This was before I became a podcast host. This was before all that. So I don't know why, but he convinced me that I should give it a go, that I should go and learn what it had to offer. You know, think of it as a way to take advantage of the time that I had, because I was at the time, you know, I wasn't working yet. And I was still kind of finishing up like treatment and all those necessary starting out, you know, phases of my recovery I had to walk through, you know, partially for the courts and definitely for my own self-development. So, but yeah, it was like something simple like that, where somebody like makes you feel, you know, like respected and valued. Yep. And I'm literally like, you were talking about the lies you tell yourself. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, what do I have to offer? Like, I don't belong there, you know? But instead of listening to that voice, I said, you know what? Recovery is teaching me that I need to step through fear and just show up, right? Suit up, show up, and see what happens.
Yep.
You know,
and that's
follow
God's
suggestions.
Battle. That's God's battle. That
So
you're stepping
I
into that.
signed up.
Yeah.
I signed up for that class, and that class still to this day is one of the most, that week doing that Recovery Coach Academy was one of the most amazing, intense experiences of growth and development that I've experienced on this whole journey was that week.
Wow.
Yeah. And if I would have listened to the voice in my head, I wouldn't have went. Just like when I was at church with those cool guys from NA for the coffee and donuts, and then I was hearing this message that was completely tailor-made for me. He didn't know it, but his voice was God's voice trying to get to me, cracked me wide open that day.
100%.
And then when he said, come down for this altar call and let me, you know, like pray with me to welcome Jesus into your heart, I went to take a step and something inside of me said, don't do it. And I stopped. And then I remembered everything you want is on the other side of fear. So I said, screw that, shut up. And I walked down there and I did that prayer. And, you know, I ended up getting Jesus in my life, man. Like, and it never went away.
Wow.
So it's like, you just got to show up, man.
For sure. Yes. I love it. Look at Jesus. Yeah, that's my journey's it's been quite the journey for me to getting back a relationship with Jesus. And so I can attest to how powerful it truly is, for sure.
Amen.
So how can people find you? So you have the Way Out podcast. I just want people to know how they can connect with you, see what you're doing. If they're struggling themselves, or a loved one listening to this who has a, you know, loved one that's struggling, like, just how can they find you? What support do you offer? What are you doing?
Well, you know, because of my advocacy, and also the thing that started this is like all my stuff set to public, because I want anybody to be able to reach me and find me, right? Like, and it mainly started because of those first two children that I had, right? Because I can't expect anything, but maybe if they want to get to know their dad, it'll be really easy for them to find tons of content where they could probably seriously feel like they know me on a personal level without ever meeting me, because there's so many things out there now. But yeah, anyway, so the Way Out podcast, you check us out on our website or on any of your favorite streaming platforms.
We'll put it in the show notes. We'll put a link so people can,
So that is wayoutcast, all one word, .com, wayoutcast.com. And then the Recovery Cafe, Anoka County, which is coming soon. to Anoka County. We haven't got our location yet. We're still in the development phases. I'm on the board of that organization. It's going to be huge. It's going to be amazing. And God is working so much in this already. But that is a very long website. It's all one word, Recovery Cafe, Anoka County.org. You can check us out on there. You can find me, Jason Rudeen, on all social media networks pretty much. Mainly, though, I probably do Facebook and Instagram the most. Also, the Way Out Podcast has a page on Facebook and on Instagram. If you're a Spotify user and you like music, you can also look up the Way Out playlist, and that's an eclectic, you'll get musical whiplash, but it's a songs that symbolize recovery to all of our guests on this playlist. And it's grown so much since I first thought up that idea, and we built this playlist for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a long one. You can jam all weekend.
I love that. Have you put any of Jelly Roll's? We were talking before we hit record that I love Jelly Roll. Oh, yeah. The Beautifully Broken album. Oh my gosh, so many good songs on there.
Yeah, there's quite a few, but I do add a couple tracks every once in a while, but I try to limit that sort of. It's just when I'm like, this has to be in there, you know, but we try to keep to just the guest picks, but every once in a while I'll get a bug up my butt and I'll go add a couple tracks. And yeah. I don't know, Lindsay, if you've heard of them, but Rare of Breed is another one.
No. Oh, okay. Now I'm going to check it out.
His music's all faith-based too. So
wow.
And it's like rap. Oh, I love that. Country rock. It's good.
Nice. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Well, Jason, a true warrior, that's what this podcast is all about. It's just highlighting stories of people who have battled, and overcome the darkness. And I always say that people who have overcome addiction, in my personal opinion, like they are my heroes. So just thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us. And for just stepping into the continuing to face the battleground in life. But, now it's like you're on God's battle of bringing love and light and hope to this world. And so what a true warrior, and just what an honor to interview you. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The questions were amazing and very thought-provoking, and I had a couple really emotional moments in this interview. So I appreciate it. I'm glad that I got. Yeah, I always get so much out of this stuff.
For sure.
Doing this, whether I'm on your side doing the interviewing or I'm not, it's like I always get so much out of it, and I'm super grateful to be able to do it. So
so much love to you.
Yeah, you too.